When you look at, you know, the emerging forces in society that are tearing it apart, what are the biggest ones to you in your mind?
Well, certainly ideological possession plays a huge role. And I suppose to some degree that's probably misplaced spirituality. It's something like that. And so I've always been struck by Nietzsche and Dostoevsky's analysis of the pathology of the West, you know, that we're still suffering the cataclysmic consequences of losing our religious grounding. You need some conceptual scheme at the highest level of philosophical generalization. You need some way of answering what is good and what is evil, and some way of answering what's the purpose of my life, and maybe what's the purpose of existence. And at that level of analysis, the only answers are religious. Now, you can debate the rational acceptability of those answers, but that doesn't matter. I'm talking about the level of analysis problem,
right,
essentially. If you're talking about such things, you're in the religious domain. Well, intact cultures, let's say, or traditional cultures, have a structure of ritual and myth and dance and music and art and story that frames that uppermost domain of conceptualization. And people live within that. When it's fragmented and shattered, as ours has been, people turn to substitutes. And those substitutes have all too frequently been, well, either a cataclysmic loss of faith in existence itself, which is a nihilism that has terrible psychological and social consequences, or the elevation of an ideological position to the status of a religious belief. And
right,
that's not good. And so everything in its proper place, you know, you render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's. And, you know, the rationalist objector will say, well, there's nothing that's God's. And I would respond to that by saying, be careful what you presume.
right,
Because something has to act there. Something has to exist there. And you fall into a religious story. So if with the critique you laid out, for example, of social institutions, you say, well, they tend towards corruption. And maybe they're so corrupt that only a fool would have faith in them. And that's a powerful argument. But it's essentially a religious argument. What it does is it takes the problem of evil. So it assumes that there's evil, which is the corruption and the power. Maybe you don't use the term evil, but it doesn't matter. It's
right,
still what you're referring to. And then it places it in social institutions. It says the problem of evil is located in the social institution. Well, that's a religious claim. Right. It's also a faulty religious claim, and it'll twist you up and bend you around because it's incomplete. And I tried to detail that to a large degree in chapter 11 when I talked about, because you can find malevolence in your own soul. You can find malevolence in other individuals. You can find it in the social order. And you can find something that looks like malevolence or certainly feels like it in the natural world.
right.
And if you only focus on one of those, then, well, it's very convenient for you. I mean, so one of the things I always wonder, for example, if you locate evil in the social world, let's say in the institutional world, in the patriarchal tyranny, well, then you found an enemy. Right? And then you found a target for all of your unexamined spite and resentment and cruelty and homicidal tendencies, all of that. It's very dangerous. And the more sophisticated observers, and I think you can make this case merely as a consequence of observing literature, more sophisticated observers place the battle between good and evil inside the human soul. And then it manifests itself in social institutions as well, but that's not the primary locale of
right,
the divine battle.
Right.
And
Christopher Hitchens, the late, great,
mm-hmm,
writer, had argued, in a polemic, God is not great, that religion should be replaced by the canon of literature, that theology should be thrown away and replaced with literature, that all of our great lessons that we need to know are in literature. Do you find fault with that?
Well, the deepest literature is religious.
Okay.
I mean, that's what Hitchens didn't realize, is that if you took 100 great books and sifted them so that you derived one greatest book from it, then you'd have a religious text.